This is a really weird system. Alright, okay, so it's been 100 kilometers. I've ridden this bike a lot more than 100 kilometers. This 2017 Giant E-Tex1. I've had this thing for 10 years. I've ridden this thing so much, but the past 100 kilometers I've been running what's called a bicycle odometer. So a bicycle odometer is basically just a thing that sort of tracks your speed, your average speed, the distance, how far, how long you've been riding, and other things like that. Depending on the system that you get, it will start tracking things like calories, fat burning, carbon sort of offset, all that sort of thing. It'll add backlights. The one I've had up here is probably the most reliable one that I've had in a very long time. See, because bicycle odometers, there's a lot of ways that you can track the speed of the bicycle, or at least sort of the rate of the bicycle, right? So on most systems, you'll have a little magnet right here on the spokes. And this magnet here will just essentially just spin around and around, tracking the rotation of the front wheel. And you'll have a little magnetic sensor here that will just collect that data and send that up to the little computer up here. The system that I had before was maybe about $30 or $40, and it was a wireless system that died in a year, and I barely used it. The one that I had before was very similar to this one, and it lasted maybe 1,000 kilometers before I eventually sold the bike and just never got around to putting it on another bike. And I've seen GPS ones that are about maybe $80, for example, and I know the GPS ones, the battery on there, you need to charge every single day. If you forget to charge it, it won't track your data. And I know in this part of the world, even though we have satellites basically sort of tracking everything sort of on the planet, for some reason the satellites that are just up there don't seem to like here very much. Which is why I wanted a system that could basically sort of work exactly here without having to rely on a system that's up in the stratosphere that doesn't seem to want to collect data from here all the time. If it's a slightly cloudy day, if there are trees in the way, if there's a hill, if you're facing the wrong direction. I've tried sort of collecting data here via Strava and Google Maps, and every single time the actual speed of which that I can go doesn't seem to be kept on my system all the time, which means if it's not collecting my speed, it's not collecting the distance traveled, that sort of thing, unless of course it's calculating while you were here and now you're here, so that's how far you've gone. But look, this system just here, so this here is the cockpit to my bike here, but this is it. If you go on eBay and just have a look up bicycle computer, bicycle odometer, you'll have to excuse the condition of my hands. I have eczema, but this here was about $10, and it is fantastic. I'm not a very proficient rider. I've done 100 kilometers. It accidentally sort of miscalculated the magnet one time. I have an average speed of 15 kilometers an hour, and I've ridden for 6.5 hours since getting this computer. But like I said, with this bike in particular, I've ridden this thing so often. I think, like, this bike in particular, I have been riding this thing for 10 years, and I've ridden it up mountains, I've ridden it across country, maybe not Australia, but I've ridden it, maybe like, I've done dozens of 50, 60, 80 kilometer journeys on this bike. It's probably the amount of distance that this bike has traveled is probably within the thousands, right? But it's here right now with 100 kilometers because the computer that I had connected onto there was probably the first time I connected the computer to this bike in particular, and it was very inaccurate. So regarding wireless systems, which is the one I had here, the wireless systems I hate because you have a computer here and a sensor just down here, but the sensor sort of sticks way out here, which means I needed to add maybe 2 inches of magnets to the sensor in order for it to pass the system properly. But because the sensor sort of sits within the center of the fork and extends out here, it means I had to essentially cut it to pieces and sort of hot glue it to here. in order for it to pass this depth sensor properly. However, because we've got 100 mils of fork here and you know, sort of some exit distance here, the computer has to be within, I think, 2 feet, within sort of 60 centimeters or 2 feet from, and it was ever so slightly within that parameter, but maybe not as much. But even if you take the computer off and just, you know, it just died, right? Because it requires a very specific set of parameters. And this bike light here has a very, very tiny electromagnetic waves that's happening around it. If I could see it, it would just be just enough that it was messing with the computer, right? So I couldn't ride this at night because I'd have to take this off and put that somewhere in order for it to, and of course it wasn't an automatic system. In order to get it to work, you'd have to press one of the buttons up here to get it to work properly, right? In this system here, this is a wired system, right? So we have this little computer here with a couple little terminals right down here, right? So, and it just clips onto here and it just sits there. So you just wrap the wire around your brake cable and it just sits down here. It is an extremely reliable, vastly superior system to any other system that I've been running. I love this, and I've always wanted to talk about these computer systems because I don't know sort of if very many people do. And here I am talking about it, and I love this thing. And if you're ever looking to get a bicycle computer, at the very least, just to try out the sort of concept of numerically evaluating your accomplishments on your bicycle, $10 free shipping. How can you go wrong?